The sea clawed at Pike beneath a sky the color of iron. Spray leapt and shattered along the black teeth of the cliffs, and the wind carried the taste of salt and old sorrows up to the strand where the priests prepared a king for drowning and a daughter came home too late. Balon Greyjoy lay upon a bier of weathered boards, his hair as gray as the rocks that had broken him, his beard stiff with salt. They had drawn the storm out to meet him, Aaron Damphair said, and the drowned god had answered with a gale that spoke in the rattle of mussel shells and the boom of the caves. The drowned men's robes snapped like black sails about their legs as they paced in slow winding circles, and their voices rose in a chant that might have been wind itself, cold, tireless, and impersonal. Asha stood apart with her cloak clutched tight. The gusts tugged at her hair and set it to lashing at her cheek like a live thing. She felt the rocks underfoot through worn boots, felt their pitilessness through leather and bone. In childhood she'd loved these cliffs. Now they seemed to lean in like kin with ill advice. What is dead may never die, the drowned men droned, and Aaron raised a hand that was all rope and vein and salt scars, his wet hair slick against his skull. He looked at Asha once, his eyes as pale as tidal foam, then looked away. What is dead may never die, the Ironborn answered, a rumble rolling out of the gathered captains and men. In the gap where her father's voice should have fallen, Asha felt the sea press closer, as if it would have that silence for its own. Tris Botley stood among her men, rain on his lashes, trying not to look at her with a boy's naked want. He had followed her to Pike like a pup, and he looked at the bier with solemnity, but his gaze returned always to Asha's face. She did not discourage him and did not welcome him. She was not made to be the shore someone washed up upon. She was a longship by nature, lean and quick, with her prow toward the black line of the world. We commit him to the deeps, Aaron cried. He shall dwell in the halls of the drowned god where women may not follow and where the strong are feasted, and the weak made new. What is dead may never die. Never die, the sea answered, pounding. They bore the bier to the long narrow cutting where the steps went down. Aaron went first, barefoot and bare-chested, the storm painting his skin with needles. Asha followed at a distance, the men making way. The rock steps had been hacked into the cliff by hands she would never know, her great-great-grandsires perhaps, and every time her heel found one she felt it like a reckoning. They slid the bier out into the teeth of the waves. Balon Greyjoy of Pike, Lord Reaper of the Iron Islands, wasn't much to look at now. That he had been a father seemed a trick the wind had played. The white foam seized him, and then there was no father, no lord, only the long churn and the pull of the deeps. The drowned men lifted their hands and the chant rose, and Asha felt something cold press between her ribs. When she looked down, she saw it was her own hand upon her knife. She couldn't remember drawing it. You'll cut the sea next, Roderick Harlaw murmured. He had come up to stand at her shoulder without sound, wrapped in a sober cloak of coarse brown wool. The Reader, they called him, though his hands were scarred like any man who'd hand-sailed a skiff into a black-mouthed tide. And the sea won't bleed. Asha sheathed the knife. It should, though. It owes me blood. Your father owed you, too, the Reader said. In debts. Fathers are the sea with a face. She swallowed. Her throat was raw from the salt and from holding words back impaled on it. He owed me the seastone chair. He owed you a world you might live in, Harlaw said, eyes on the foam. See how he pays. They climbed back up. The captains were nodding into little storms of their own, heads together, voices pitched low, the smell of wet wool and iron coming off them in hot breaths. Longships tugged at their shore moorings as if they, too, were impatient with the rites. Above them a gull screamed once, derisive as a boy. Aaron caught her at the top. Water ran out of his beard and darkened the rock in drips. You will not speak in the sight of Naga's bones, he told her, eyes hard as pale pearls. The Kingsmoot is for kings. Asha didn't smile. The wind would have snatched that up and turned it into mockery. I've crossed more swells than most kings alive, she said. I've taken more decks than. It is not customary, Aaron snapped, and for a moment she saw the brother under the priest, thin, hungry for some shape to the world that would still his fears. He'd given himself to drowning, and had never quite come back. "There will be no king," Asha said, and let the sea carry those words to every captain. "There will be a queen." That turned heads. A snort from Gormund Goodbrother. A hiss of breath from a Blacktide, father's men once. Tris Botley's mouth opened and closed like a hooked fish. Salt wives and thralls and this. Aaron's face was iron. "You would heap sin upon sin until the waves rise up red with it." "Send the waves," Asha said. "I've no fear of red, but I've a fear of fools leading us to war with toys they barely understand." "Do you speak of your uncle?" The reader's quiet voice could carry when he wished. He looked past her shoulder. The crowd's tide turned. Men parted. A shadow out of the rain walked among them, charming as old song and twice as cruel. Euron Greyjoy wore an eye patch of black leather and a smile like a knife. He should have been colder, but somehow the water steamed on his skin. The men nearest him shied away without moving. It was a trick of posture he had learned somewhere far from Old Wyke. Behind him drifted 3 men in red and black with their faces tattooed in stars and tears, walking as though the storm had been taught manners. He could make the sea mind him, Euro, and he could make a room lean. "Niece," he said to Asha, spreading his hands as if the wind would hang something on them. "How good to see you not drowned. Husky suits you." She had a dozen things to say and said none. She felt Roderick Harlaw's steadiness beside her like a mast. She did not look at Aaron. The drowned god's man had once called Euron brother, said a childhood prayer with him, watched him sleep. Asha thought how poor a shield a prayer made. Victarion came a step after Euron, broad as the prow of a war galley and just as blunt. The Iron Captain's beard bristled like a weathered brush. Storm or no, he wore no hood. "Kinswoman," he said. He did not say queen. His knuckles had scars like rocks had ridges. "Uncle," Asha said, and they were courteous, and the wind said nothing of it. They went to Naga's hill. The bones turned white in the rain, curving up out of the sodden ground like the ribs of a dead world. Asha had knelt between those ancient arches as a child, touching a palm to old stone and feeling the cold of time come up through her skin. She thought of that now as Aaron strode to the center and lifted the driftwood crown. Men gathered, slipping between the broken ribs, boots sucking in the mud, voices rough as ropes. They all smelled faintly of seal oil and tar. Aaron's sermon was the storm-given words. Hard, chiding, sure of its own end. He praised the old way until the old way would have blushed if old ways could blush. He spoke of reaving and paying the iron price, and of how women were rocks and men were waves, and Asha listened until her ears were stones in her head. When at last he named the ones who would speak, her name was not there. She stepped forward anyway. Roderick Harlaw's hand was light on her elbow, but it was not a restraining hand. It was a reminder to stand straight, to speak like a mast speaks to the wind, unbending. "Let the men hear," she said, taking her place on a boulder still slick with rain. "Let them hear how a woman answers when her house is cut to the bone and the sword that did it is kin." A murmur rolled. Aaron opened his mouth, but Euron's easy laugh cut him off. "Let her talk," he said, flicking away water as though it offended him. "If it amuses the men, why not?" "It will be more than amusement," Asha said. She turned in a slow half-circle, meeting their eyes one by one. The good brothers with their wheat-tangled hair and blunt faces. The Blacktides lean and keen-eyed as hawks. Men of Drum and Orkwood and Stonetree, of Botley and Harlaw and Merlin. You've had kings who promised you green lands and fat cattle, kings who told you a storm could be unmade by shouting. How did those promises pay out? A shout? With fire? With ravens? Another yelled, the word round as a curse. With sons dead and daughters taken, Asha said, cutting across them. With thralls standing in ranks with ropes on their wrists, and green lords paying gold for their children back. That is the tale of kings promising the mander and the neck and never quite bringing you more than a good song to sing at a wake. My father fought the green land and they swallowed him as they always do. She felt the bite of the words in her mouth and let them bite her again. Pain was the iron price language paid to be trusted. But there is a war brewing that is not the green lands to make or to end. Across the narrow sea, the slavers gather with gold and ships. Gold piles where the green never sees. If we are Ironborn, if we are the sea's sons and those few daughters it trusts, then we take where men hoard. We take where other men are too proud to dig. You'd raid the free cities? Gormand Goodbrother bawled, scratching water out of his beard. They'll buy us off and laugh behind their silks. I don't plan to let them buy me, Asha said. I plan to sell them a world where their gold is good only for sinking. Euron's smile didn't shift, but his patch might as well have tilted in its straps for how the world under it changed. My niece offers poetry, he said mildly. I offer dragons. The men made a sound like a wave hitting rock and breaking. Asha kept her face still. Victarion, at his brother's shoulder, lifted something wrapped in oilskin and red silk. When he unwrapped it, the wind fled for a heartbeat, or seemed to in the way a whole crowd will hold its breath. The horn was longer than a man's arm and blacker than Pike's cliff, banded in the red of old blood that had settled into stone. It seemed to drink the light. Dragonbinder, Euron said softly, and the name moved among the men with a slither. A gift from Carthene warlocks who wanted to buy my courtesy and learned that Ironborn don't keep the change. The red and black priests behind him lifted their chins, as still as spears. We will call the Queen's children from the sky, and they will come to iron hands. Which of you wants a castle of fire? I'll not have sorcery brought to Naga's bones, Aaron burst out, convulsed by a god's anger or the memory of being a boy and seeing something he could never tell about. Get you gone. Blasphemy. Euron looked at him with a kind of lazy tenderness. Brother, he said, you drowned and came back so empty. It breaks my heart. Blow it then, Asha said. They turned to her as if a new wave had been born. The reader's hand was on her arm again, not restraining but present. She did not look at him. Blow it and call the dragons down right here. Asha's voice was calm and had to be. She could feel fear moving through the captains like fish under a boat. Quick, sleek, afraid of nets. If dragons answer to a horn, let them answer. If kings answer to a sea, let them drown. Euron's smile did move then, a fraction. The thing about horns, he said, is that they make more beautiful music in the right air. Still, if the men must have a song. Victarion's nostrils flared. He had the horn in both hands, and for a moment his eyes were not on Asha or Euron or even Aaron, but on the red priest with the scarred face who stood behind Euron. His eyes so dark that a man might have thought them pits into night. The red man nodded once, a slow hinge. Victarion lifted the horn and put it to his lips, and the men leaned in to hear a sound they would talk about in whispers for the rest of their lives. The sound cut the wind. It was not a blast or a note, not anything that had been born with this world. It was the groan of stone before it breaks. It was the sea finding a cavern that had been shut since the earth cooled. It was a thing older than speech wanting speech. The drowned men threw themselves to their knees and covered their ears. Aaron had no ears to cover. He put his hands over his eyes and trembled. The horn sound went into Asha's teeth and made them ache, and her nose began to bleed. The reader stood very still and looked into the rain with his eyes gone far inward and thought things that would keep him company when sleep left him. When the note died, and it did not die so much as become a thing you had to live with quietly, Victarion stumbled and went to one knee, sweating in the cold. Steam curled out of his mouth. He looked at the horn as if he had not held it, as if it had held him. The red priest's lips moved in a language the storm knew and did not know. Now, Euron said, laughing in his throat, who will stand against dragons? Asha wiped the blood off her mouth with the back of her hand and tasted salt and iron. There were 100 things to say about horns and sorcerers and what a man kept in his travel sack when he came courting kings. She said none of those things. She said, I will. They all looked at her as if she had drowned and come back with a fish's voice. I will, Asha repeated, and let the wind carry it so it did not seem she was shouting but that the sea was speaking through her. I will bring dragons to us, not with a horn bought from men who paint their faces to hide them, not with sorcery, with ships, with oars, with choices that will cut some of us in the making. I will go across the narrow sea and find the mother of dragons where she sits and tell her what the Ironborn will be. She looked at Euron then, and the look was a thrown hook. And I will tell her what the Ironborn will not be. Thralls will wear no more ropes under my rule. No more children sold for quiet nights. No Ironborn chained, and none chained by us. I will pay the iron price for my crown. I will pay with the old way no longer serving us. The silence could have cut rope. A wave banged the rocks as if to break something on purpose. You trade away who we are, Gormund Goodbrother spat. I trade away who you tell yourself you are when it suits you, Asha said. You like the songs. Men always do. But the songs didn't save us when the Lannisters and Tyrells came roaring. They won't save us when the Kraken turns on its own and a horn sings us into a leash. If I wear the driftwood crown, I will wear it for all of you. Not only those who can take a sword in hand. For the girls you like to buy off boats with a laugh. For the boys that go away with the black line of rope on their wrists. The reader taught me to add better than most. Men who aren't afraid to sleep will row further, fight harder, live longer. She flashed her teeth, not a smile. The slavers have made themselves fat on the world's fear. I will make them thin, and when I have, I will bring back a queen with dragons to burn the men who think Ironborn are a jest. That is the promise. And I've never broken a promise to a deck I've stood on. Words, Euron said, but it had gone softer. His eye patch made his smile look like one ram's horn, curving. Ships? Asha corrected, and lifted her hand. There were hands she had counted on because men will always count on the hands they can see. Roderick Harlaw's, Tris Botley's, Dagon Drum's, to her surprise. There were hands she had not counted. A black-tide with a scar like a lightning fork across his jaw. Dunstan Drum's youngest, who had thought her a whore for years because his father had told him to. Two good brothers who had seen Euron's men take a girl off a rope and had stopped sleeping well thereafter. The drowned men muttered, and Aaron's eyes showed the white all around like a storm-broken horse's. But hands went up. Not enough. Not yet. Asha stood quiet and let the wind wrap about her. It isn't the old way. A man called with fear and longing mixed. It will be our way, Asha said. And we will be the old men telling it to our sons and daughters when the Greenlands are ours not by rating but because no one dares keep us from them. Victarion got to his feet with slow affront, like a keep's gate grown stiff. You would shame the Ironborn. His voice was a cleaver. A woman cannot sit the seastone chair. Then don't look, Asha said. There was laughter because laughter goes where fear thins. She let it stir and settle. Uncle, I will take half the Iron Fleet and make you master of the other half. I will leave you the men who want the old songs. Take them, sing them, raid if you must, but don't follow my brother onto the rocks. When I bring dragons to Old Wyke without horns, the men who went with Euron will be pulling tar out of their hair, and I will ask no man what his hand did when he was hungry. Victarion looked to Euron. Their eyes met, and something old and hurt snarled between them in a place language could not reach. The Red Priest inclined his head the smallest fraction, the storm dimming for a breath between them like a candle touched. Victarion's fingers tightened on the horn, then loosened with an effort. He said nothing. You would be queen, Euron said. His voice had lost its lazy. Very well, niece. Let the drowned god judge. Aaron lifted the driftwood crown with hands that trembled, and that angered him. Who calls for Asha Greyjoy, daughter of Balan, to sit the seastone chair? Ido. Roderick Harlaw's voice surprised no. No. I do, said Tris Botley, and men snickered because boys must. I do, said Dunstan Drum's son in a voice like new iron. Hands went up. There was fear in it and hope and spite. And where those three meet there is a crown. No one counted, that wasn't our way. But men could see which way the wind had set, and the wind had settled in Asha's hair and would not leave it. Aaron set the crown upon her brow as though he were putting a shackle there, and said the words because words had to be said. Rise, Asha Greyjoy, queen upon the seastone chair. She rose with the sea under her boot soles and the horn's taste still slicking the back of her throat. And Euron smiled until he did not and turned away. That night, under the old bones of Naga and the new bones of a father, Asha sat with Roderick Harlaw and made a map out of damp sand. The reader wrote with a bit of driftwood. Their markers were shells and bits of broken crab and a carved bone that had been her father's pipe tool. The rain had gone to a steady weep. "Victarion will not hold long," she said, looking at the place they had marked as the Iron Fleet, a fringe of mussel shells. "He is a good hammer that thinks anything not a nail is an insult. Euron will send him after you," the reader said.
Euron tierifes crailti.
"Victarion will be both leash and dog. If you wish to keep your fingers, watch the leash. We can outrun the Iron Victory in close wind, not before the sea gods," Tris Botley said, hovering. He'd taken to drawing little fish in the sand when he thought no one was watching, as if to feed his hunger something harmless. "Your black wind dances in tight waters. In the open, Victarion will crush you between oars. Then we avoid the open until we must not," Asha said. "I'll need fast keels. Your Lord Father will give them." "Botley ships are yours," Tris said. "I'd give you my lungs to fill them, if it got you further." It was reckless and young and honest, and it warmed her briefly the way wine can warm when you've no time for food. "We go east," she said. She traced a line of broken shells from Great Wyke along the stepstones. "We take safe water and we take dangerous water, both in the right measure. I want to see Volantis smolder. Burn a bit of their black walls and you'll find yourself a cause," the reader said, dry. "I don't need a cause," Asha said. "I need a rumor. I need men in Meereen to know that Ironborn came without chains." "To do what?" Tris clutched a shell so tight his knuckles went white. "Kneel to a girl with dragons?" "Kneel," Asha said, and watched him flinch.
Stand beside.
"Make an offer. The words are less than the doing. I'll give her ships. I'll give her the promise that the Iron Islands will break the last of their thralls and never take another. In return, she'll give me a world where we don't have to die for cows." "Cows are stupid," Tris said fiercely, which was not the point but was true. The reader picked up Balon's pipe tool and smoothed a line of sand, making the narrow sea gleam in the torchlight. "And Euron." Asha put the dragon horn in front of her on the rocks between her boot soles, a length of night that seemed to drink every memory of morning. She put a hand upon it. It was warm, or her blood had made it so. "I will take this to Meereen and put it where all can see and none will blow. And I will tell Daenerys that Euron Greyjoy will come with another in his hand, or with nothing but poison in his smile. And then, when she looks at me and weighs the old sins of my people against the new sins of her enemies, I will not blink." The reader's eyes were kind and unkind. "That was how they saved you." "You mean to change us," he said. "I mean to salt us again," Asha said. "We've turned stale." She sailed 3 days later on a wind that had a mind and a mood. Black Wind took it like a lover and dragged it along at her back. Tris White Alyss and Damfair's lean Orkmouth trailed, and 3 Harlaw cutters, and 2 good brother tubs so obstinate in the water they rode the sea flat behind them. Asha stood at Black Wind's prow in boiled leather and mail, her crown wrapped and stowed, the horn lashed beneath her bed with more rope than a man might need for a sea serpent. The sea made a promise to her those first nights. "If you respect me, I will only try to kill you half the days." She thought that fair. They ran the stepstones like wolves through deer country, fast and low and lean. They hugged the dark of islands where smugglers had lit signal fires since before the first swords were hammered, and the signal fires answered them as if saying, "Yes, you are thieves, but at least you are pretty thieves." They took a Volantene galley under black sail in the moon's downtime. The galleymen fought with the hopeless pride of men who had no good choices. When it was done, Asha had their captain before her, and the smell of pitch and blood was thick as stew in the air. "Who bound the slaves?" she asked him. "Men with pay," he said through a broken tooth, and spat red. He was fox-eyed and wore a chain of copper fish. "Who unbinds them?" "I do," Asha said, and had the ropes cut. The freedmen stood like men do in their first day, looking surprised to be made of meat and not rope. Asha had them fed and set a cup of watered wine in each hand, and she felt Trist's eyes on her, struggling to make a new shape for the world he knew. "You'll need rowers," he said afterward, under the scraping moon. He meant if you set them loose they'll run. He meant if you set them to oars you'll be a liar. I'll need to row, Asha said, and took an oar. She rowed. The horn slept under her bed like a curse with a heartbeat. Sometimes in her dreams she heard it. Not the sound Victarion had forced, but a smaller sound, a breath, a warble, a trick of her own blood. She would wake with her hand tight on her dagger. Once she woke to find the reader watching her, his back to her door as if he'd been sitting there. A long while, and she did not ask how long. You look like a man who's killed once for mercy, she told him. I look like a man who got old reading other men's mistakes, he answered, and they did not speak of it again. Euron's hounds found them in sunlight where the sea glittered as if it had forgot its age. Iron Victory came out of that glare like a sunrise with its teeth out. Victarion had put a red sail on his foremast, and it bellied the wind to arrogance. He had 3 other ships with him and the Red Priest on his quarterdeck, his face a tattoo of burn and prophecy. The wind died as they came, not because the Red Man willed it, Asha told herself, but because the sea enjoyed jokes. Tris Botley licked his lips and said, "Fire ships," and Asha loved him for the thought. She had 2 ready because she had always been a woman to plan for the flavor of a thing. They were oar-light tubs crammed with pitch and oil and bits of broken pottery from 10 Islands' kitchens, with their masts trimmed to half and their helms lashed. She held them snug to the shadow of a headland until Iron Victory thundered past, oars stroking in cruel rhythm, men rowing and singing because men cannot resist singing when they think they cannot be stopped. "Let them hear us," Asha said, and had her drummer beat a rhythm that was not the same and was quicker. It set a different taste in the mouth of the sea. They loosed the fire ships then, and the wind came back as if laughing. Pitch smoke billowed like a curtain, hiding the black mouth of the cove where Asha's longships waited. Iron Victory did not shy. Victarion had never met a thing he would not hammer. He trusted the priest at his shoulder and the gods in his chest and the long hard oars of men who thought a woman's rule an insult to be varnished over with victory. He drove his flagship straight for the smoke with his jaws set. Asha slashed the line with her own hand and black wind leapt. They ghosted the fire ship's flanks, the heat licking at their paint, and turned quick as a red fish when a child dips his hand. The tubs went on and the pitch caught and the smoke climbed green as rot. Victarion's forward ram struck one, and the tub split open like a rotted gourd. Fire bled into his oars. The men there did not scream because men well-trained don't, but their breath went a shape the wind knew. "Now," Asha said, and Black Wind's captain put her where she needed to be. On Iron Victory's quarter, too close for scorpions, too close for a clean turn, exactly where a knife belongs. Grapnels flew, boards sprang, men flew with them. Victarion came at her across his deck like an iron bear, and the Red Priest lifted his hands and said something in a tongue that made the hairs on Asha's arms prickle. For a moment the wind fell dead around them in a ring, failing to stir hair or sail. She did not let fear come. She met her uncle's charge. When his sword came down, hers angled up, and she felt the weight of him, the heat. She felt her shoulder give and then set. "Woman," he said like a curse and like a prayer. "Uncle," she said, and turned his blade with hers and put her knee into his middle with no honor at all. The point of his sword rang sparks from the iron leathers that cladded his boot, and for a heartbeat they were too close for either to use the weapon best. She head-butted him. The world flashed white and he reeled. She went under his guard where his armor pinched and cut with the dagger she carried as a promise to herself. She felt leather, then mail, then flesh. He bellowed. She slid away, nimble, and her breath was fire in her mouth from the pitch smoke. The priest said another word, and a coil of wind snatched at her hair, and then let it go as if abashed. Victarion did not fall. He was a wall that had learned walking. But when he gathered himself again, the Red Priest put a hand upon his arm and shook his head once. The meaning of that passed between them like a wave under a keel, unseen but felt. "Yield," Asha said softly. He bared his teeth. He had always loved his brother beyond reason and beyond anger, and he had never known what to do with the part of love that was anger. He looked at the horn. It lay in a hammock strung beneath the overhang of the stern castle, its black length banded with old blood like rings in oak. The priest's gaze went there, too. Asha walked to it and took it with both hands. It did not burn her, though the sun did. She held it up so all her men and all Victorians might see. "This kills the man who blows it," she said in a voice that carried and did not need to shout. The reader read the runes. "The priest knows it. My uncle felt it take his breath as a price." She turned the horn and the sunlight crawled across it like oil. "I will not have it. I'll not have songs made with a man's dying throat and called victory. Throw it over." Triss breathed, as if disgust and awe could make twins in his throat. Asha's fingers tightened. For a heartbeat she saw herself pitch it into the sea, watch it fall like a promise unmade, see the bubbles bloom up and break on sunlight. But she thought of Euron and his pockets full of magic he did not believe in, because belief would have made him stop using it. She thought of Daenerys Targaryen, somewhere under a sun that was not the sun of home, with creatures at her call the world called old and foolish until they burned it awake. The horn would be proof and a warning and a temptation. Best to bring it where its danger could be named aloud. "I'll bring it to Meereen and set it at the Queen's feet," she said. "And she and I will decide with eyes open what to do with it." "Woman," Victorian said, and there was something like respect there now, grudging, the way iron will acknowledge iron when it has no other choice. "If you take it there, my brother will come." "He'll come either way," Asha said. "He was born coming." She spared Victorian because she could, because mercy saves a step on the ladder of a life, and because she could not afford to make enemies where she might make walls. She took his oarsmen to replace the ones burned on the fire tub, and she left him his pride enough to limp to whatever god his priest offered. The red man watched her with an interest that made her skin feel thin. "You wear a crown that cuts," he said in the common tongue, his accent like coals breaking in fire. "I can bleed," Asha said. "You will," the priest said and smiled, which was either kind or a threat or both. When she asked his name he said, "Makoro," and then said nothing for a long time, looking at the way the fire took to the sea. Meereen rose out of the heat like a city made of baked bread. The harbor stank of fish and triumph and waste, and the siege sat outside its walls like a disease that had been taught to pitch tents. Great yellow ships rode at anchor, men in golden armor looking sad under paint. Asha's cutters skated among them like thieves at a fair, laughing, and she put her longship's prow under the shadow of a great stone harpy's broken foot. She sent a boat with a white rag to the quay. Roderick Harlaw went with it, because men looked at him and saw that he would know what words were for. They took her to a pyramid that rose tier by tier like a thing that had taken a breath and forgotten how to let it go. The air inside was cool as cellars and smelled of dust and old incense. Her boots made little thuds. Men in soft robes and too much gold led her past murals where men in collars bowed in hundreds. Faces the same in all directions, and she felt an anger come that was clean. The throne room was long and shadowed and painted in men's minds as much as in the world. They had imagined it so many times that it had a weight. The young woman on the dais had hair that made her skin whiter and eyes that made the room's candles look pale. She had a stillness that had nothing of girlhood in it. Dragons would prize stillness when they landed, Asha thought. Stillness told them the ground would hold. "I am Daenerys Targaryen," the queen said in a voice that did not ask you to like it. A man with a face like an old sword stood near her throne. "Barristan," the reader murmured, all the songs in his head waking as a flock at daybreak. On the other side, a lean man in green and gold whose smile looked like a trap set not for beasts but for himself. Beneath the dais, a child with the gravity of a banker. Missandei, a softer voice supplied. "Asha Greyjoy, queen upon the seastone chair," Asha said, lifting her chin the smallest mark. "Daughter of Balan." The queen's mouth made a shape that might have been a smile if you understood it differently. "I have heard of your uncle, and of a horn that pulls at the air." Asha put the bundle upon the floor with a sound that made the guard start. She undid the wrappings and set the horn in the room like a wolf let into a pen of cows. A hush went out of the courtiers in a ring. Barristan's jaw tightened. "This kills the man who blows it," Asha said. "My uncle blew once and went to his knee." The runes say the price plainly if a man will add. I will bring no leashes for dragons where I ask to be taken as ally. I bring proof only, and a warning. Euron Greyjoy will come with a smile he taught in hell. Daenerys Targaryen looked at the horn as one looks at a knife and a mirror both. And what do you ask? She said. Let the Ironborn be different than they have been, Asha said. She stood with the sea in her bones and the sand of Naga's hill still under her nails. I will end thralls amongst my people. I will not let the old men sell their sins to the young with a cup and a song. In return, give me war where it matters. Use my ships. When you go west, I will row at your side. When men cast chains, I will break their wrists. When old houses wall up their daughters with gold, I will put oars in those girls' hands. Barristan Selmy twitched in that small disapproving way old knights have, and the green and gold man. Hisdar, the reader, breathed, as if he had swallowed a treatise on the man and been disappointed. Smiled as though gold set teeth the way it sets rings. Missandei's eyes shone like wet stone, serious. The queen stood. When she moved, the whole room thought of wings whether it wanted to or not. You would put aside the old way. If a thing is old and eats your children, you don't keep it and say it's your father, Asha said, and heard her own father in the cold of that. Daenerys came down 3 steps, and 2 dragons' shadows shivered across the walls as if the flicker of torchlight made them. Asha had not seen them at rest. The great beast that had come to sit like a cat by the lower pillars was black and bronze and had a smell of hot iron. The other, smaller and green gold, had eyes like cut glass and a trick of tilting his head like a hawk. The third was gone, the reader had said, and gone meant myth in cities, but Asha knew better. Things that go do not cease. Do you believe in gods? Daenerys asked. I believe in the sea, Asha said, and in knives. Then we will talk, the Dragon Queen said. They talked in a room with no gold and the smell of candles and papers. Roderick Harlaw and Barristan Selmy sat as men who could drink their own patience measured. Missandei poured water. The reader asked a question about supply. Barristan asked about Euron. Missandei asked about thralls with a gravity that made the world feel properly arranged. Asha said what she would do and what she would not, and she did not put sugar on it. When Daenerys Targaryen listened, something like wind stirred in the room. The world had been waiting for someone to listen like that, Asha thought with sudden, foolish joy. Outside, the siege coughed. Inside, Asha set the horn on the table between them like a fist and watched Daenerys look at it, the way a woman looks at a man who has tried to sell her her own shadow. I am offered many things, Daenerys said. Indeed, there was contempt that had been earned in her mouth. I have been offered 10,000 unsullied. A city, a peace that is not peace. Why should I take Ironborn? Because we are quicker, Asha said. And because even men as wicked as ours can learn if you make the learning taste of salt and fear and pride. Give me a war that makes the old songs choke and we will sing you new ones. Sing me ships, Daenerys said, Bear. Asha grinned then, sudden as sunlight in squall. I am a ship, she said. The Black Wind has a name because I keep company with her. We are not separate. I don't have it in me to be afraid of water for long. She leaned her forearms on the table like a comrade. Let me out there. Let me bite the yunkish in their fat flanks and show them how honest a blade looks when there's no auction to buy it away. Daenerys Targaryen looked at her a long while. 1,000 thoughts moved behind those pale eyes, too quick for Asha to read. And for a heartbeat she wanted to take Daenerys's wrist as she might take a sister's and say, hold fast. The wave is big, but the boat is sound. She did not. Words have their own oars. Very well, Daenerys said at last. We will burn the slavers' fleet and break their siege, and we will do it together. If you betray me, I will teach your people a lesson they will tell until the waves forget the shore. If I betray you, I won't live to hear it, Asha said. I'm not much for lessons I don't survive. They made their plans in strokes, not flourishes. Asha took her cutters out by night, sleek black knives under an unlit sky, and put the fear of a new thing into the men who had only learned old fears. They slashed anchor cables so quiet the ships did not know they were moving. They cut the tiller ropes of galleys with crews who had learned a whip's language and not their own. They let panic do work for them because panic is more tireless than any oarsman. When dawn drew its knife across the harbor's throat, the slavers' fleet woke to ships turned any which way and men staring at ropes that had snarled themselves into madness. On the city's walls, men shouted. In the Queen's pyramid, a door opened and closed. An hour later, the black dragon came off the roof like night finding wings. His scream made the harbor stiffen like wax under a candle. The green-gold one came after, scales flashing like minted coin. Asha had known fear all her life, in moods and measures, some subtle as tide and some sudden as a falling mast. But the fear that took her then was different. It made her want to grin. Black Wind's crew stood spark-still as the dragon's shadow ran along their faces. Asha looked into a red-gold eye as big as her head and felt it look back, a weighing, and then it was gone with a wing beat that threw the air like a child throws a toy when it is through with it. "Row," she said softly, and the men rowed. They went in among the slavers like wolves in sheep. The fire Asha set then was not a wanton thing. Fire can be disciplined if you teach it, and it can be kind if you decide it will. She drove her prow into a great round-bellied cog whose decks were stacked with bales of silk. The silk went up with a sound like a lover's sigh, and the men on its deck looked as if the world had refused to justify them. The black dragon tore the mast out of a Yunkish flagship and made a toy of it, batting it once, twice, 3 times before he remembered an old hunger and licked a man across his length with fire. The green-gold dragon fell on a galley and learned what oars taste like. Asha saw Daenerys on the black one's neck because some things are true in the world even when nothing else is. A queen with a dragon is not a rumor. She saw the woman's white hair snap in the heat and the surety in her posture, and felt a pride she had not planned to feel the day her father had died on a bridge meant to break him. They broke the siege. The Yunkish army did not run all at once. Men as fat with certainty as they had been do not run easily. They tried to remember that they had numbers and machines and choke points and plans and contracts and friends who would pay for them if they were taken. But dragons do not remember contracts, and Asha Greyjoy's longships do not respect plans. The women of Meereen watched from the walls in silence, then began to shout with a music that made Asha's skin prickle, as if the city had learned a new language in an hour and wanted to say everything in it at once. After, beneath the shadow of the broken harpy, Asha stood with Daenerys and licked the burn off the back of her hand with the tip of her tongue. It tasted of pitch and something sweet as vengeance. Daenerys's dragons lay with their slit eyes half shut, like cats that had eaten too much. Men came and went with reports. The green and gold smiled his careful smile and talked of terms. Barristan stood a little apart as if the world might need someone to remember a straight line when the fog came up. "Allies," Daenerys said. She made the word new. "We sail soon." "Soon is a dangerous word," Asha said, practical by necessity. "You have freed thousands. They must be fed or freedness tastes like ashes. Your men must learn the sea or it will drown the good they did on land. The wind must turn." But yes, soon. When they left Meereen, the wind did turn. It turned steady, as if the world wished for a thing and decided to ease its doing. Asha put Dothraki on decks and watched them find their sea legs like colts learning ice. She put Unsullied at oars and was reminded that discipline can row a boat just as well as fear. She watched the freedmen bring their children to the low places along the rail where the water could be seen opening, and the children laughed at the way the sea tries to lick everything. She watched Daenerys stand with the dragons on the foredeck as if she had been born there and thought, you could be a sea queen if you wanted. The thought pleased her and terrified her and was none of her business. She taught the queen how to tie a bowline. It mattered to her that Daenerys knew one good knot. The crossing was not easy. The weather in the narrow sea is a book with many chapters and no index. They lost a Harlaw cutter to a squall that came down off a sky as clear as glass. They had to kill a man who went mad and tried to cut the lashings of the horn, even though Asha had set it in a box in her own cabin and posted 2 of the reader's men at the door, men who had read enough to know that curiosity with magic is a way to make your family dress in black. They had to learn each other's languages for parts of the sea that had never heard them. But when Dragonstone rose on the horizon, its ridged back like a creature asleep, it felt not like a miracle, but like the end of a long, honest day's work. They took Dragonstone with more awe than blood because some places surrender when you arrive with a thing that the place remembers in its bones. Dragons had crouched on those towers in the days when Asha's great-great-grandsires had been teaching their daughters how to choose a knife. The garrison on Dragonstone had gold lions on their sleeves and fear in their mouths. They did not want to be the men remembered for dying in a place that had kept so many better men already when a dragon was in the sky. Daenerys Targaryen stood in the great sea hall with its carved pillars, dragons running up them like vines, and listened to the way the hall held the sea's sound. Asha stood at her shoulder as a friend might and thought, "We have begun a thing that will end everything or begin everything again." She took off her crown and set it upon a dragon-headed step because it seemed to her that crowns were better when they did not sit so heavy on the head that you could not see. Word went out like something winged. The Reach shivered in its vineyards. King's Landing's ravens fluttered like ash shaken by a shovel. The North heard and did not hear through snow and hunger. On the Iron Islands, Euron smiled at water that made no sound and braided some girl's hair into a noose that he didn't tighten yet. Aaron went to the sea until his lips turned blue and stayed because he had no other prayer left that felt like breathing. Victarion counted his scars and kept a ship afloat with rage. Asha sailed north because the sea is made of currents and obligations both, and there was a current she could not ignore. A brother in a lord's winterlocked cage. The reader tried to tell her it would be wiser to wait, to send gold to Manderley or men to Stannis or a letter to no one at all. But she had made a promise to the part of herself that still knew the sound of Theon's laugh when he was 10 and stole a net full of fish and insisted they had leapt into his hands to be his friends. The snow came down in slanting knives as they made for the lonely coast, and the surf iced where it leapt. Asha took 30 men and 3 women she trusted and came ashore in a silence that felt like a weight. They moved under spruce boughs heavy with white. The world smelt of wet wood and old breath. Winterfell rose from the white like a memory of sadness. Fires here and there made orange holes in the dark, and men in pink and black moved along the walls. Bolton men, flayers turned garrison. Asha hated them with a purity that felt like a prayer. She had had a thrall once whom her father had made her hit and told her if she would be a man in this world she must learn. She had hit the woman and remembered forever the shape the woman's breath made. There are wrongs that become the measure you take with you to weigh other wrongs. They went in under the walls where the stones had sagged and been badly mended. They went like seals go through black water and were almost as cold. Asha had the shape of the place in her mind because she had played there one summer with Robb Stark and Theon, boys trying to be men, men pretending to be boys, men who would die for songs in years to come and never for fish. She found Theon in a tower with a door that smelled like piss and a guard asleep in a chair with crumbs on his beard and a piece of sausage clutched like a relic in his hand. Theon looked at her as if she had come out of a story where he did not believe in much. His hair was white in streaks where it had forgotten how to be brown. The bones stood sharp in his face. He whispered something that might have been her name and might have been the sea. "Come," Asha said, as if that had been a plan all his life. He could not stand at once. She had thought she had steeled herself against this, but steel has a way of showing you where it is thin. She put an arm around him and he smelled like old straw and fear and some small thing that had not given up. They moved slow as prayer down the stair. A woman with a pale mouth and too much silence went with them, because Asha had a heart stupid where women like that were concerned. A heart that kept a tally and knew it could never be paid. Jane, they told her, and Asha did not ask what the rest of her name had been before some man bought it. They got them out with the sort of luck you make by being too stubborn for the gods to look at you and say, "Let it be." Asha left 3 dead men in the mud behind her, and one who would die later when his breath found the knife in it. She did not pray. She did not think of the drowned gods' feast halls. She thought of Theon at 9, shivering after he had fallen into the shallows in autumn, and how she had wrapped him in her cloak and called him a little Lordlander to make him laugh, and how he had laughed anyway with salt on his lips. On the beach, Theon coughed out the sea and looked at the longship and looked at the black shape of the dragon high and far, returning from some night hunt with the moon tangled in its claws. He tried to stand straight and could not, and laughed because his body betrayed him and he had always laughed when he was embarrassed. "Queen," he said, with a twist of his mouth that was his old mouth under scar and thin. "You always did want too much. I want enough, Asha said. She put him in the boat and covered him with her own cloak. He did not fight it. Euron came down on them off the Mander where the current runs sly and the mud banks show their teeth in seasons the charts don't like to name. He came with silence and 5 lean men o' wars and a thing with a belly full of wildfire that someone had talked a mad alchemist out of, and the sky above them was a gusty gray, the kind that turns purple before it opens. The reader stood on Black Wind's quarterdeck and looked like a man composing a sensible letter in his head to be delivered to himself in a month that might not come. Theon lay under canvas below with a knife under his hand because he insisted and Asha did not believe in insulting what a man needed not to drown twice in a week. Euron's voice carried queerly across water. He had a way of speaking as if a woman were sitting on his knee alone in a room and not in front of 5,000 eyes. "Niece," he called, as if making her small, as if small were deadly and soft. "Euron," Asha said, and would not call him uncle. The wind lifted her hair and licked her teeth. "You brought toys. I brought songs," he said, and the wildfire ship eased forward, pregnant with other men's folly. He grinned then, big as a wound. "And did you bring me dragons, or only a tame little lioness of a girl with white hair and no clothes?" The black dragon answered him without language. The sky split open. The fire that came down wasn't green like the pyromancer's jars. It was honest. It loved what it ate. The wildfire ship bloomed and went to heaven and then to hell and then to stories. The shock of the blast threw Black Wind sideways so hard men stumbled or snapped with a retort like a name shouted in a storm. Asha did not fall because falling was a thing she had made a bargain with when she came out of her mother. She knifed her eyes to silence, to Euron's pale face haloed in smoke. He was laughing. She felt it in her bones like cold. Another horn hung at his hip, shorter, banded in white with runes like tangled net. He lifted it. His men parted, some in eagerness, some in fear. She had a heartbeat to think. He found another. He always finds the one more of anything you can die of. And then he blew. It wasn't Dragonbinder's sound. It was thinner and meaner, like a fox's bark a long way off, like a woman's scream you cannot prove you heard when you come back to the fire. The black dragon flinched, sidled in the air, screamed his contempt and kept screaming. He did not come to Euron. Asha understood something then she had known without words, that dragons keep their own counsel and men who think to bind them with trumpets will end up servants to their own music. Euron's horn had its price, and the price came due in the first man who took the note's bite into his lungs. He went down with his mouth open and his eyes empty and a trickle of black along his lip. Asha threw Black Wind into silence like a woman throws a punch when she is through talking. They hooked on, snarling. The men of silence had their tongues out, tacked to their lips, cut away in some bright idea Euron had had of loyalty, and they came over the rails eager as dogs. Asha met them with a joy that was almost relief. She had been waiting for this song all her life. She found Euron at the height of the wreck. He was a tall man and the deck loved him because he loved it. His boots knew how to grip. He had a sword that had tasted odd places. He had eyes that looked at her as if she were a story he might want to tell or burn. "Niece," he said, and there was pain under it now because fire had licked him and left marks he would call lovers. "In the end," Asha said and set her blade. They fought like kin, meaning with a knowledge of the ways the other cut and the ways the other stopped it. Euron moved like a sail in a fickle wind, clever, not strong. Asha moved like a mast in a storm, flexible, not brittle. He laughed when she parried and smiled when she cut him and looked delighted when she did not fall. He had not wanted a dull morning. The world had given him a bright one. He could love a niece a little for that. He fainted. She took the faint's child and made a blade out of it. She raked him under the rib where a man keeps his breath. He hissed. He bled like a man who believes himself God and takes it as a revelation. "I dreamed," he murmured, and spat blood like wine, "that I stood on a mountain made of my brothers and you were the wind. I am the knife," Asha said, and put it where his words were softer. He didn't fall. Of course he didn't. He was too good at surviving his own songs. But he stumbled, and in that stumble the dragon's shadow came down like a verdict. Fire kissed the deck by his boot. The rush of it drove him back. The white-banded horn cracked in the heat. Asha saw his lips shape a word that might have been a prayer to a god he didn't believe in. She moved in his shadow and made sure he fell, not with a flourish but with simple things. A trip, a shove, a weight of body exactly where it had to be. He went down into smoke, into the hole the dragon's fire had made in the deck. She did not see him again. After, the sea fell quiet because the sea has a sense of theater. Men lay ragged as rope on decks, and the smell of burned wood had become the air they lived in. The dragons turned slow circles overhead. Not weary but not eager anymore either. They had eaten. Asha's hands shook a little, and she put them on the rail and felt the world's steadiness come up from wood that had been trees once and still remembered wind. Theon came up, pale but standing. He put a hand on her shoulder. His fingers were bones in a glove. "Sister," he said. "Sister," she said, and it filled a place in her she had kept saved and empty for years. "I was always coming." "That's the thing about you," he said, and managed a smile that looked like winter letting go the smallest amount. "You come." They went home. Home is a word with too many meanings for men who sail, for women who won't stay put. Asha took a dragon to Pike. The islanders came out in their hundreds to watch a shadow cross the sea like a thought, and old women made signs and young boys shrieked and threw shells into the air as if they might bribe fate. Aaron stood on the strand in a robe that had once been black and now was salt, made of stiff and prayer and grief. He looked at the dragon and he looked at Asha and he looked at the sea and could not decide which god betrayed him. "You broke the world," he said to her when the dragon crouched on Pike's black cliff and put its head down in morning sun and closed its eyes like any honest beast. "You brought a fire that will not drown." "I brought a thing older than your god," Asha said gently, and touched his shoulder. He flinched like a beaten horse and she let her hand drop. "I brought a queen who keeps a promise better than any wave." The Iron Islands changed because anything alive either changes or dies. Asha called the captains to the seastone chair and made them promise in sight of the sea as men had promised other things for 1,000 years. She made them free their thralls, and she made them swear never to take more, and she made them look into the freedmen's faces on a spring morning when the wind was mild and the world did not seem to be counting against them. She made them listen to the reader recite numbers about harvests and ores and the way men live longer when they are not being bought and sold. She made them clench their teeth and shook their hands afterward and told them that in the next war there would be fat to cut again and you could eat better if you didn't eat your own sons. Some men broke their promises because men do. Asha took their ships and their names for a season and gave the ships to other men and kept the names at her belt until the men earned them back with work. She was merciful like the sea. Unpredictably and with good reason. Men learned. The world noticed. Daenerys Targaryen went to King's Landing on wings and on ash and on the backs of songs. Asha did not go to the city because she did not love cities and because her work then was narrower and made of tar. She held the gullet with longships and taught Tyrell men how to be afraid of narrow water. She ran food to Dragonstone and Castle's Keep and a little walled town called Driftmark where old men told her stories she pretended were new so they could feel clever again. She held lines with rope and with words and with the simple practice of being there when she said she would be. When ravens came needing her, she went. When ravens came wanting her, she said later. In time, the picture changed and kept changing, as such pictures do. Lannisters made terms or made fires. Tyrells bought and sold. The North remembered itself. Stannis crashed against the Boltons like a wave against a promontory and died on the beach in one telling and lived on in another. The Riverlands bled and began to seed again. It is no small thing to bring dragons to a board and ask men to keep playing their old games. But Asha's sea kept cutting into the land where men thought it had no right. She threw her longships up estuaries no Lannister had bothered to name, knocked down bridges, lifted up little boats full of people who had nothing and made something out of them with oars and food and coin they did not owe to anyone. She was queen in the way a woman at the helm is queen, by virtue of standing where the wind sees her. One summer dusk on Pike, on a rare day when the sea smiled like an old dog at her feet, Theon sat beside her on the black rock where her father had once stood to measure himself against the storm. His face had filled out to man again and would never be boy. He had a girl's scarf tied at his wrist for luck. Beneath them the dragon slept with his head on a bed of rock warmed all day by sun. He snored like a bellows. The wind smelled of kelp and smoke. "You've done it," Theon said, almost accusing. "You made a thing where there was no thing. The men go to sea and come back to pay their wives in fish and coin and no girls in chains." "Not no," Asha said. "Not ever no. But less and less next year. That is the work." He looked sideways at her. "And you don't miss it? The old songs? The stink and the rush and the swagger of raiding?" "I have new songs," she said. "I have this." She gestured with her hand, "Sea Dragon." The long thin line of a ship cutting past the island's shoulder with a wake like a thought behind it. "I have a queen who kept faith with me across a world. I have a brother who can look men in the eye without flinching at his own name. I have a priest who still hates me, and that means at least one thing is anchored." She slanted a look at him and let her mouth tip. "I have Tris Botley bringing me mackerel wrapped in his mother's cloth, as if that were a proposal." Theon snorted. "He's a boy still." "So am I," Asha said lightly. "Some days. The days with wind." He was quiet a while. The sea made its little forever sounds. Below them the dragon's tail twitched in dreams. "Do you think of father?" he asked then, so empty of pretense that Asha felt the question go through her like a knife that had been heated. "I do," she said, "in ways that no longer make me a child." "What is dead may never die," Theon said, and made it sound like a memory he'd grown up enough to own. "What lives may yet be salted," Asha said, "and if we must be gods to ourselves, let us be gods who know how to forgive the better part of our own sins and none of the worst." He reached and took her hand as if he had always done that and as if he might not again. She let him. In the sky, far, something black and bronze passed with the moon under its wing. The ships moved like a line of thought that had decided to become plan. The sea breathed. Once, when the night was particularly clear and the Milky Way lay like a spill of salt across the dark, Daenerys stood beside her on the rampart of Pike's sea tower, and they watched the tides trade places. "I have learned to be feared," Daenerys said without pride or apology. "It is a lesson that leaves a taste. I have learned to be obeyed by men who think it an offense," Asha said. "It has its flavor too." "And liked?" the queen asked. "When I have time." Daenerys laughed then, and the sound was not a court sound. "Do you still wear your crown when no one is looking?" "Sometimes," Asha said, letting the truth stand like a post for clothes. "Sometimes I take it off just to feel my head lighter and to remember that no one was born with a weight she didn't ask for." They stood a while longer and watched the dragon come and go like a star that forgot itself. In the morning there would be ravens. There were always ravens. But for an hour the world held. There were battles still. Men who had grown used to getting rich by taking set their teeth and tried to learn new ways without giving up the old, and that is like teaching a dog to fish. There were deaths that came right and deaths that came wrong, and the wrong ones were many because the world is badly balanced. There were nights Asha woke with Euron's laugh cutting at the back of her mind and had to go down to the shore and let waves run over her boots until the cold ate the sound away. There were days when Aaron came to her and said words like blasphemy and new and undoing in a string, and she listened, and sometimes the listening did good to one of them and sometimes it did no good to either. But there was a line you could draw, with a steady hand and a hard stick. From a girl standing in the rain at Naga's Bones to a queen watching a dragon sleep on Pike's Cliff where generations of drownings had fed the sea. And that line was as real as rope. It tied the old world to a new one made not out of soft songs and firelight but out of salt and oars and decisions spoken aloud where men could hear and understand they'd been said. In that world, when the wind blew out of the west and the sky hung low and the sea lifted to meet the ships with a smile, a woman could stand at a prow and know that there are ways to pay the iron price that don't leave children crying. One winter morning, Asha walked down to the strand while the tide was thinking. The sky was pale. Her cloak was heavier than her mail. She wore no crown because crowns had their time and its name wasn't always morning. The sea licked her boots and the dragon's breath made little curls in the air where he lay further off like another piece of the world the tide had only half decided to claim. The reader met her there with a book bound in oiled leather that had belonged to some maester who had used it properly enough to stay a maester and yet care. "You asked me to keep count," he said without preface, because neither of them liked it much. In 3 years, the islands have taken fewer thralls than in any recorded like span. We have lost fewer men to raids. We have brought home more coin in trade. We have buried fewer children. The numbers are ugly but less ugly. You are making ugliness work. She took the book and held it like a sword. Do numbers sing? She asked. Sometimes they hum, he said. She closed the book and it felt like closing a door on a room that, for once, had done what rooms were supposed to. She turned and looked at the sea and looked at the dragon's long lazy throat and looked at the horizon where one long ship had just put itself against the dawn. What is dead may never die, she said, and the words came out of her new. And what lives may always change, the reader said. She went back up to the keep then. There were men to talk to about ropes and wintering and making barrels of apples last to spring. There were women to hear about a man who had not come back and an argument to settle over a boat that 2 cousins both believed their grandfather had meant for them. There was a letter from Daenerys that smelled faintly of smoke and of the flowers they had planted in Dragonstone's courtyards where once there had been only ash. A letter that said, "Come if you can. The realm is a hungry thing, and if you cannot tie it up at the mouth with ships." There were 100 pieces of work that would never end. She took a breath that put the sea where her heart ought to live and went to the first.